let's take a look at finding some answers here with inverse trig functions. So remember, we have a limited range of values that we're looking for. So for our angle for sine to -1, it's going to be -90 to 90. For cosine, it's going to be 0 to 180 or 0 to pi. And tangent is going to be -90 to 90 or -pi/2 and pi to pi/2. Now these don't include those values because those are where we have vertical asymptotes in the graph of tangent. And remember, the reason why we use this region is because if we use anything more than that, we have repetition, and we also have the actual graph of inverse would fail the vertical line test. It wouldn't be a function. So in order for us to only get one answer, we have to stick within these ranges for our angles. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of these. And what we're going to do here is kind of use our unit circle and our knowledge of special triangles to go ahead and figure out where our angle lies. All right, so the first one, I look at this and I have square root of 3 over 2, right? So I know that sine is opposite over adjacent, or sorry, opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over adjacent is, of course, tangent, right? So opposite over hypotenuse. And so I know that opposite this angle is going to be square root of 3. This is 2, and then this would be 1. So my first angle here is 60 degrees. Now when it's in the first quadrant, you're fine because that is right within our range. Really, we're looking for a range with sine from -90 down here to 90 up here. All right, so we're done with the first one. Now let's look at cosine of -1 of negative square root of 2 over 2. Now, remember, we actually have a couple values. If you think of this as your unit circle, right, you got 0, 90, 180, 270, and then obviously we get back to 360, right? But we need an answer from 0 to 180. Now, the only time that cosine is negative from 0 to 180 would be over here in the second quadrant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my triangle here. And I know that negative square root of 2 over 2 is actually the same as -1 over square root of 2, just has the denominator rationalized. And so what we have here is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So if my angle here is 45 degrees, well then my actual angle that I'm looking at is 180 minus 45, right? So my angle here is going to be 135 degrees. And we can see that that is fine because it falls within 0 to 180. All right, if we wanted to write this in radians, we would have 3 pi over 4. This last one, 60, right? When you need to write that in radians, just think 180 divided by 60 is the same as pi over 3, right? Or sorry, 60 divided by 180 is the same as pi over 3. Okay, let's do this next one. So let's look at tangent here. So tangent, I got -1 over square root of 3. All right, and now, so in order for tangent to be negative, we need an answer from 90. And, you know, this is 270, but we could also think of it as -90. We need our answer to be somewhere over here. Well, in order for tangent to be negative, we got to go down here because we're going to have opposite of 1 in the negative direction, and then this is going to be square root of 3 here. So we know that this angle is 30 degrees is my reference angle, but because it's going in this direction, we're going to think of that as -30 degrees, and so my answer here would be -30 degrees. Okay, last one, secant of -1 of -2. Okay, well now we just got to think about here, we have for secant, we're going to have hypotenuse over adjacent. So we have 2 over -1. Well, I got to think about where that's going to happen. Well, the only time that I could have -2, and this is going to align with the same range that we're looking for, in this case from 0 to 180 for secant as we have for cosine. And so the only time I'm going to have -1 is going to be in this direction, where I'm going to have -1 here. 2 is my hypotenuse, and square root of 3 is here. So I think about opposite square root of 3. I actually have a reference angle of 60 degrees, but then my total angle here is going to be 180 minus 60, which is going to give me 120 degrees. So my final answer here is 120 degrees, or if we wanted to write that in radians, would be 2 pi over 3. This one, of course, would be negative pi over 6. And now we're done with these four. Now, one last thing to note is if you see something where it says sine a negative 1 of 2, right? Well, that doesn't work because sine is never anywhere but between negative 1 and 1. So if that happens, any number that's outside of our suitable y values for inverse, well, what becomes our x value for inverse sine, that's going to be does not exist.